Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. And I want to take this time to go ahead and give you all yourselves a hand. For showing up and for being here today and for bringing an open mind, bringing your knowledge that you have in this space, and also bringing an open mind to learn. And so when we think about this evening's discussion, it is very much so about learning, about collecting fruits of insights from powerful leaders that span all across the nation. And so if you are here today for the Rural Urban Food Sovereignty Black Communities Taking the Lead conversation, you are definitely in the right space. We want to thank our virtual friends for being here online with us today. My name is Dr. Maya Price, and I'm an assistant professor here at GW with the Global Food Institute, teaching in an array of food system classes that span all the way from a domestic lens to a global lens. So I have the honor and privilege of being able to host and moderate these critical discussions as we think about the power of food, but as we think about the experience and power that Black communities are leading as part of this conversation. So today, I want you all to settle in. I will say that please take note of the fruits you'll hear today. We will be opening up conversation for questions towards the end. But with that being said, I'm going to kick it off with just a powerful force of nature and leader in this space. And when I first met Tambra Raye Stevenson, Tambra, I've looked up to her for many years. When I started my career in Kentucky and leading a lot of the food conversations there, and I always wanted to know who in this space is really doing the work and having the conversations, taking action. And so for me, being able to see Tambra, this glow of lights leading so much force across Washington, D.C. and also across the nation, Tambra has really inspired me with all the work that she is doing. So Tambra is the founder and CEO of WANDA. And WANDA is the Women's Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture organization that is doing so much to support women, to support agriculture, and to support food, the meaning of food, the impact of food. So I am super honored to be introducing Tambra today. And Tambra, come on up. I think we all want to hear from you.
I think we can all agree that now more than ever, community matters and community is our medicine. Even in moments where we feel that we don't belong, not only to the city, to this nation, to the world sometimes, know that you belong right here, right now.
Right.
So thank you, Maya. Thank you, George Washington University, for having me provide remarks for this critical conversation with thought leaders across this country that are making a way out of no way in their collective cities. I first want to come before you tonight, not only as a daughter of the diaspora, but an adopted daughter of Ward E in Washington, D.C., a community that knows what it means to live under food apartheid that Karen Washington has coined, but also where policies, not accidents, have carved out inequality, where systematic neglect has left us with few grocery stores compared to liquor stores that Frederick Douglass, even in his memoir, My Bondage, My Freedom, heightened and brought attention in 1855 of showing that how liquor was flowing like libations during holiday times to ensure that those who were enslaved on the plantations would not escape. And so understand the context in your next drink. So as I come also as a fifth generation of Oklahoma, my people put their hands in the soil and brought forth life. They raised cattle, they built towns, they governed themselves, and they created Boley, Rentisville, Langston, when you think about historical Black farming communities, places where Black prosperity wasn't just a dream, it was a daily bread. I carried with me the spirit of Black culture of my families who their names echo to this day. Over the weekend, my birthday weekend, you had the Bill Pickett International Finals. If you've never been, it's always sold out, but it's it's a hoot and a holler to attend. I would say that if you've not had a chance to come to Oklahoma during the summertime, and rodeo season is high and thick. And so I share these stories because they matter, because they remind us about Black food sovereignty. It's not new, it's not a theory, it is our inheritance. It is our survival and it is our power source. Let me ask you, how many have even heard of Boley, Oklahoma, with a raise of hands? Exactly. But Booker T. Washington talks about Boley in his many speeches across the country, even in the time in which he was building Tuskegee University, because he highlighted not just the towns around Tulsa, but also Boley as an example of Black Wall Street, of the Black dollar circulating in communities, the ability for Black folks to govern themselves. And in my most recent interview with the mayor of the former mayor's mom of Boley, she had shared with me this summer that at the height of Boley, they had more than 20 grocery stores. What Black community in this country can you even point to that has even over 10 grocery stores? So I'm bringing this to our attention because when we think about Reconstruction and Jim Crow, many would say that we're going through Jim Crow 2.0, the systemic erasure of cultural contributions, of agricultural legacy that has built not only this food system, but democracy in this country. And so when I think about over a century during Reconstruction, our people built thriving food economies in the very soil that our others have said was barren, and yet through Jim Crow, through systemic disposition, through what we call Jim Crow 2.0, legacies were erased, communities demolished, and wealth was destroyed. And yet through it all, we kept feeding ourselves and we kept feeding the nation. We know that from scholars like Bobby Smith out of University of Illinois Champaign in his book, Food Power Politics, and also the work of Nana of White Burgers, Black Cash, that the destruction of Black wealth is tied to the destruction of our Black health because of our ability to vote. These systems were designed not just to keep us from land, but to keep us from life. But family, I need you to hear me tonight. We are not victims, but we are visionaries, as you see before you today. We are not erased, we are eternal, and we are not barren, we are builders. Yet USDA has had a history of discrimination. Yes, redlining has shaped our cities, and yes, inequalities are alive today. But policy is not set in stone. It can be reimagined, and it must be reimagined, because sovereignty means leadership, and leadership cannot come from marble buildings and corner offices. It must rise from the grassroots and farmlands as much as the carrot tops. And it must grow from the soul of our lived experiences. And our ancestors remind us, even in bondage, they planted hidden gardens, they cultivated collards and okra and yams, and they kept seeds in their aprons and carried them from Africa to the Americas and said, we will live, we will feed our children, and we will endure. And in the words of the old hymn, his eye is on the sparrow. I know that he watches me. We are that sparrow. We are that light, and we are that hope. So I say to you tonight to plant hope. Hope in your own lives, hope in your families, and hope in your communities. And for me, hope means helping other people every day while still having optimism and perseverance and enthusiasm on life. And hope is not passive, it is active. It is a seed that when watered with love and intention grows into liberation and planting hope when you answer that email from a grassroots Black organization when others ignore them. Plant hope when you validate voices that have been silenced. Plant hope when you choose to see and listen and to affirm, because hope is justice and hope is affirmation. It is the first harvest of sovereignty. So tonight I leave you with this: bloom where you belong, but do not bloom alone. Plant seeds in others so that we all may bloom, because food democracy will not come by accident. It comes with our ability to believe that when we plant it, we water it, we must also defend it. And our ancestors fed this nation and our communities, built these thriving economies, not only for ourselves, but for all. And we will reclaim what has been lost, and not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. So I want to leave you with this poem, Plant Hope. Plant hope in the cracks of concrete, where weeds once whispered despair. Plant hope in the kitchens of mothers, stretching beans and greens with prayer. Plant hope in the soil of Ward 8, where stores are few but faith is plenty. Plant hope in the hands of our farmers, descendants of 2% of 20. Plant hope in Bowley's memory, and Rentyville's dusty streets, and Langston's proud Black cattle calls where sovereignty still beats. Plant hope in Fulani herds and cowboys riding free, and rodeos and resilience, our legacy, living legacy. Plant hope where systems crumble when policies betray. Plant hope in each tomorrow when justice finds its way. For hope is not a whisper, it is a seed in sun and rain. It is the roots that crack through shackles. It is freedom born from pain. So plant hope, beloved, plant hope in yourselves, in your kin, and in your land. Plant hope into the harvest that comes, sown by the collective hand. Plant hope until we flourish, sovereign, strong, and alive. Plant hope because by planting hope, we will not just simply survive, we will thrive. Thank you very much.
You know what, Tamara, I can hear you talk all day. And you know, as Tamara says, hope, plant hope, and I think there is a lot of that we can all do in this room. So looking forward to hearing those thoughts, and thank you so much, Tamara. With that being said, we have an all-star lineup. I mean, can we just give them have an all-star lineup. And when I think about planting hope, each and every individual on this panel is doing just that. So I'm not going to steal their thunder when it comes to their introductions, but Dion, I would love to kick it off with you.
Everybody was late.
And having each of our panelists introduce themselves and share what brought you into this work, and also your perspective you bring to today's conversation when we think about food sovereignty, Black food sovereignty in this space and supporting Black communities.
Word. What's going on, everybody? We're not going to act like this is a funeral because most of you all don't have service on your phone, so I get your undivided attention. Dion Dawson, founder and chief dreamer of Dion Chicago Dream. I am a guy that's been eating food for most of my life. And that was a joke. It's okay. We can laugh in here. And the work we do in Chicago and the Chicagoland area is basically fighting food insecurity through last mile delivery and logistics. A lot of fancy words to just really talk about how we try to have transparency and ownership when it comes to the food system and the supply chain. When we're talking about food sovereignty and Black food sovereignty, for me, it's really about dignity when it comes to what's on the plate and ownership when it comes to what got it there. And I'm bringing excitement. Anybody that knows me or been exposed to me know that I'm only going to be quiet and serious for about 30 seconds. And then I'll just bring too much love and fun to this work. So I'm excited to be here with these amazing ladies. Thank you for the invite. We're going to have fun tonight. So excited to be here.
Awesome. And Qiana, I'll pass it to you next.
I always have to go behind him. Such a evening, everybody. So my name is Qiana Mickie. I'm wearing two hats today that I wanted to share and connect the dots and how I explain myself. One, my day job. Most folks know me from being the first executive director of the New York City's Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture. So that's my day and weekend job, oftentimes in the evening as well. So in that work, in establishing the office, I wanted to create a North Star of the intersection of environmental, racial, and economic equity. So finding a way to create and generate just inclusion to that work and try to address the disparities that we find in our city. So the ability to grow food, to be educated and share that knowledge with each other, but to also minimize the city's contribution to climate crisis, but also foster resiliency and create a spectrum that supports food and climate stewards from not just community members, but also businesses, and making sure that work gets to them as well. So helping New Yorkers be a part of that fabric of that success of the city. I think this is on and off. Are you able to hear me otherwise?
It cut out, but we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I'm from the Bronx. I was born in Richmond. I was born in Richmond, but I did grow up in the Bronx, so I talk really loud and really fast. Okay, so thank you. This is better. So that's my day job. What before that started 3 years ago. Before that, and what I still do, and the hat I'm wearing tonight, so I could actually speak freely. I'm not speaking for the city tonight, so I can talk about my work, but I'm not speaking for the administration. Who I am speaking for and bringing my voice to, because I thought it was important, was being somebody who's worked in the field of food and farm policy. I started as a community advocate over 13 years ago. I run a consultancy called QJM Multiprise. So bringing that lessons learned from my volunteer work, connecting with community, helping folks start their own nonprofits, for-profit businesses, helping folks connect to policy learning as I was going, being most, informed by the most impacted and trying to bring that work to the forefront so folks felt like they could create economic viability that could meet a mission and a budget. Is the work that I do in the consultancy. So this was the voice and perspective I wanted to bring today is hearing and seeing just from my experience being a single Black mom, raising my son by myself, along with my family, my community, growing up in the Bronx and trying to always find a way to connect what were my roots in Richmond and my family that's still here, and the connection to land and the relationships to food, but how to bring that to the work that we're doing even in urban settings.
So, love that. And I love, Qiana, how you said, y'all can hear me without the mics.
No, you can't.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Price and GW for the invitation. My name is Ashley C. Smith. I'm a Lexington, Kentucky native. I'm a twin mom to 6-year-old fraternal twins, Caroline and Trevor Jr., and wife to Dion. And for the last 8 years, I've been an agricultural sociologist, developing the mission and vision and body of work of Black Soil KY. And we're an agribusiness with the mission of reconnecting Black Kentuckians to their heritage and legacy in agriculture. And so we've grown Kentucky's Black farming sector, which makes up about 0.7%, around 312 farmers from the end of the line to the front of the line in a 5-year period, making them the only segment of farmers with a 5-fold growth in their valuation of their products in the market, in spite of losing land and primary farm operators. And so we'll talk a little bit about our seed to shelf commitment that has refined procurement for these small to mid-sized farms and really breaking barriers and efforts across institutions and communities. And, this work really started as an experiment. Somebody who didn't have any ag background, but was recruited to work in agriculture, and seeing how fast I was able to identify, support, and invest in Black farmers when large land grant institutions with large budgets for procurement, just oddly could never seem to find these individuals to speak to. And then when they found them, they had a litany of issues in which why they felt they could not work with them. So, we really worked around all of those pieces. And so I'm excited to speak about that tonight. So thank you, Dr. Price.
And certainly, not last, not least, Cicely.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Oh, did I turn this on? There we go. Good evening. So my name is Cicely Garrett, and I am here by way of Atlanta, but was born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia. Before I moved to Atlanta, I actually lived here. So I bled Hoya Blue for undergrad, but I have a graduate degree from GW. And I think at the time in my class, most of the people I went to school for were going to be like lobbyists and other things. And on the first day, when I was like, I don't know, I might have a foundation or something, like everyone in the class was just looking at me like, what is that? Why would you be spending your time? So I thought that doing like service work might be a second career. But, .coms and everything burst and the job market shifted. And so I got into this work a little bit earlier. I don't consider myself a foodie at all. I think I got into this because I feel like everyone should have the same power of choice regardless of your zip code. And so I don't feel like it is for me to determine what that is, but I am staunchly committed to what is agency and self-determination look like for people to be able, but it's hard to say that people have that if everyone doesn't have the same things available to you for you to choose from. So I would say that's how I got into this work, and food just happens to be the vehicle in which I do that. And so, yeah, about in January 2022, Dr. Jazz and I, Dr. Jazz is my work wife, became co-executive directors of National Black Food and Justice Alliance. Dr. Jazz lives in New Orleans, and so we talk to each other daily, but do not work in the same space or building, but complement each other very well. And so the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, for those who may not be familiar, we are a national organization and we are a coalition of Black-led organizations from across the country, intentionally organizing together to cultivate and advance Black leadership, um, food sovereignty, Black food justice, amplifying what our narrative should be like in place of that. And what does it look like for us to really achieve, build institutions that support and cultivate what self-determination looks like, to create our own food systems and to ensure that our culture is centered within it. Um, it's been a wonderful and wild journey, and look forward to sharing more about what that is and how we can show up to create what we want to see. But thank y'all for having me.
Yes. And Cicely, I'm gonna have you start, kick us off. And, to really ground us in our discussion, I want to start with the broader landscape of what is happening in Black communities today, especially when we think about food, both from a farmer perspective, but then also from a community perspective in itself. So Cicely, what would you say are the most pressing challenges today, economically, socially, politically, that Black communities / Black-led organizations face?
I would say our most pressing challenge is that we are existing in a space, and I'll use this context, Western world, but not internationally as well, in which there are forces that be that are very committed to us no longer existing. And what is the defense for someone that would like to see you be extinct? And so it isn't that we don't have enough innovation, we don't have enough smart ideas, we don't have enough people who are committed to a thing. Like if I had to describe where we were, I would say that people are defiant, still audacious in how they are approaching the world, wildly resilient, but yet at the same time exhausted from years of just trying to exist and be. And I don't feel like people are asking for handouts or for other stuff. We are asking for repair from previous things and like wanting people to be accountable for what that is. But we also would just like for people to be out of our way to allow us to build how we would like to build and just be and exist. But the amount of time and energy that is putting into us not being okay, and the effects of that, I think, is our greatest challenge. But it gets mixed up in all these other things. I don't know that it's current administration or other stuff. All these things were issues that I had the day before the election. And so after the election, Dr. Jazz and I were like, should we put out a statement? And we didn't put out one because I don't know that my to-do list changed. It got amplified. I think there's maybe more people outwardly saying the quiet parts, but our existence at National Black Food and Justice Alliance, we knew what it was and that this wasn't built for us before then. So I think our greatest thing is just a lack of full understanding and appreciation for our humanity, and how much energy is being put into us not being here.
Yeah. And Dion, with Dion's Chicago dream delivering tens of thousands of pounds of fresh produce every week to dozens across Chicago neighborhoods, how would you describe the state of Black farming and Black food, especially when it comes to the work that you're doing? And what are you seeing on the ground as far as needs and barriers and opportunities?
All right, so we're gonna do activity really quick. Everybody, hold up both of your hands for me, please. All right. So I want you all to close your eyes real quick. And what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that you have a chart or a diagram that you've drawn of the food system. Now, using your hands, which we can all count up to 10, if you're missing a finger, I'm sorry, okay? I want you to display the number of how many different stops in the supply chain or just in the food system are in your diagram. You drew it, this is your understanding. Just take a moment, whether it's retail, farm, whatever. I want you to think and then display a number for what your diagram shows. Okay? I'm gonna give you about 10 more seconds. All right, cool. Keep your hands up. I want you to open your eyes and I want you to look around at how many people have different answers. So what I'm seeing on the ground is what everybody is showing on their hands. There is no universal definition for what a lot of these terms are that we are leading with. There's no universal agreement on how many stops in the supply chain there is. And so as a result, a lot of what I'm seeing on the ground is a lot of people talking loud without not knowing anything of what they're talking about. What we're seeing on the ground is there's a lot of food activity that is not matching the same amount of economic activity. And so as a result, what we see is a lot of people that want to feed people and a lot of people that are feeding people that have no connection to the overall market. And so as a result, when we talk about, power in the system, when we talk about wanting to change or enact change, what I realized early on was that after about our second year, we were moving more produce than 90% of the market. We're purchasing, packing, and delivering 250,000 pounds of produce per month. And what happened was is when we started connecting to local growers or hearing from farmers downstate, they had no internal systems or infrastructure to meet our demand that we already were connected to with our last mile delivery. And so when I think about this, I'm overwhelmingly motivated to not bullshit people. And so I'm able to go into rooms and I can understand how our people have been wronged and how everything is so divisive. But I promise you it's a sleight of hand trick. Year over year giving when we talk about philanthropy moves but a fraction of a percent per year. The way that philanthropy is connected and anchored inside of capitalism means that it's not going anywhere. Money is just moving differently. It did not disappear. And so what I'm seeing and what we've decided to do is number one, we've decided to internally make sure that we know what we're doing when it comes to having internal infrastructure and systems with everything that we're accountable for. Not everything else, just what we're accountable for. And so now 5 million pounds later, we can account for every single piece of produce that we've ever purchased, packed, and delivered. We know exactly who it went to. And so this farce or this idea that we can't have supply chain transparency is just not true. How can something that some of you had 3 or 4 fingers of, how can something with 4 steps not be traceable? That's crazy. But that's because we're not asking ourselves, what is the universal thing and theme that we agree on? What's that glossary of information? And then from there, how are we building on it and holding ourselves accountable to it every year? I'm only here because I don't lie to people. I've lied before. We've all lied and stolen and cheated and everything. I just decided to try to be the best version of myself possible while serving my family, my community, my organization, and the overall food system. And so what we've seen is that if you're actually serious about being accountable to the people you say you want to feed, then it's going to take a lot of internal work, not only internal to yourself, but a lot of accountability with the systems that we build so that not to say we're right in what we build. Because I'm always going to be more wrong than I'm right. But if you ask us why we do a thing, I can give you the exact reason and intentionality and who we talk to and what we thought about. And if we have to change it, we'll change it. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. I did see a lot of different fingers and hands and all over the place. And, Qiana, I wanna transition it to you when we think about from the local to national, how are Black rural and urban communities experiencing this issue differently, just based on your perspective? And where is their overlap?
Yeah, it's a big question. It can be a little complicated. I think what I was thinking about how to answer that and what I think resonates with a lot of folks and just thinking about, yep. You know, this week and in the last 3 weeks, one of the other things that Dion and I actually collaborate on is the USDA Urban Ag Advisory and Innovation Production Committee. And we had 3 public meetings that typically are spread out over a course of a fiscal year, but had to be done 3 weeks in a row and at the end and before the end of September due to some of the current federal administration and structures. But I think what came through that adversity, I think oftentimes is what we see in resiliency. And I think that's one of the commonalities that we have, whether it's rural and urban. So yes, it was a public urban conversation, but agriculture is common for us. We all should be eating food. We all need to eat food. We all deserve to have the right to food. And in those public comments, what I was hearing from farmers, whether they were peri-urban or what is urban in other cities, may not look as dense as a city like New York, was that people were looking for technical assistance from folks that understood their practices and activities. They felt that they deserved the resources to be able to do the work that they were already doing, and that they should have the self-determination and the autonomy to make the decisions on their businesses. So whether it's a community-based organization or a nonprofit, that this is they deserve the funding and the resources to support the work that they know, because they're building it based on what they know their community needs. And that we all deserve our federal administration to have parity and equity in our resources, and that come to the community. And that to me spoke across the board in a lot of different questions. So I hear that often in urban and rural spaces. That's a commonality. We want to be able to have our self-determination. We want to be able to build the alternative economies that we deserve and should have, and they should thrive. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the power, the resources, and the parity in that within our government, in our systems. We should have both. And we should be able to be represented and seen as both and moving as both. Because the reality is the capitalism that we do live and struggle under was built on chattel labor. It was built on our ancestors. It was built on the exploitation of their labor. And it was built on extraction of the land and deterioration of land of indigenous and Black folks. So while we still are struggling to work through racialized capitalism and that, you know, that inherent connection between racism and problematic profit, that doesn't mean, and then our policy is built on that. And we all are impacted by that. And we all are impacted, whether we work on policy directly or not. Agriculture policy impacts us. So we should be able to be the most impacted to inform what policy is, what the changes should be, no matter how inequitable it is. And we need to be at both positions. We should be able to work and support each other to support a system, build within, if there's folks that want to be within the system change, whether it's in government jobs, academia, institutions, or even on committees, trying to amplify what folks are saying and bring those recommendations, even in an administration that doesn't want to hear it. It should also be the opportunity to coalesce or collectivize that power beyond just a federal. We still have city and state. We still have each other. And we still should be creating an opportunity where we're creating that dollar and that multiplier effect within our own businesses, our own economies, supporting each other in our own struggles. So that to me is like common, whether it's in rural spaces or urban spaces. But if we want to, and we're all struggling, right, and suffering through that. We also see a lot of food insecurity across the board, and disproportionately in Black and brown communities. So a lot of folks are struggling and dealing with that. But we also have solutions. So what's different can be scale. What's different, scale in the sense of how we're doing it. Some folks are doing it in a hyper-local way, in a community garden, and trying to grow and share and teach. amongst their community. Some want to scale that and make a business of it. Some want to just scale it and make a bigger business of it and maybe go regional. What we see in rural spaces is oftentimes folks maybe have had additional connection to land and acreage. In urban settings, some folks are not able to have that kind of access or that land tenure. So the stewardship of the land can look different. So that's some of the differences is scale. Some of the differences is tenure. Some folks have been able to, have generational wealth or build or buy property. In some cities, in some areas, that may not be attainable because of the cost of the land. But again, it doesn't mean that the solutions, even though they're different, that they can't be united. And I think what we look at in terms of supporting each other is where that commonality comes in. How do we foster that resiliency? How do we look at our different scales, our different scopes, our different ability to create economic wealth, and how do we support each other? So whether it's a community garden, that money has to go back to the garden and they can't make a profit because they're doing it through volunteer, it doesn't mean that we can't have collaborative and shared wealth there. At the same point as building a business and creating that, we should have both and we should have all, but it doesn't mean we should do one or the other. So I think, to me, just to take it back to that question, I think the commonality for me is that everybody wants to have self-determination and people want to be able to build and inform the agrarian reform and policy that they want to see and not just rely on their resiliency, but actually be able to thrive in their autonomy.
Love that. Thank you, Qiana. And Ashley, I want to turn it over to you. When we think about how these, broader challenges manifest in a rural context, especially the work you're doing in Kentucky, particularly for farmers working to maintain generational land and market access. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So these rural farmers know that no one is coming to save them, especially if you live in Kentucky, which is, highly overlooked, but we're really thriving and amplifying our lived experience that many folks have no clue exists. So urban communities should care and invest in these rural farms because they do have the greater access to land. They have the increased amount of acres, thus increasing the diversification of production. But our biggest issue is attracting investment from national funders, philanthropists, and foundations. If you are a grant reviewer and you're reviewing someone's application from a Chicago or New York versus electing to Fayette County, the reviewer is automatically going to assume that density is going to bring more outcomes and a greater investment and impact. But we're really poised to continue that trek of self-sufficiency, and we really focus on that market share development, really seizing the moment. So right now we have farmers opening up their own stores, they're furthering their expansion of portfolio of their market share. And so really the major challenge is balancing their pricing for their rural peers who are already struggling financially while being competitively priced for their oftentimes more upwardly mobile urban audiences. And then getting them weaned off the drip of LFPA, all of these USDA programs that you were selling people $25 heads of cabbage. We're gonna need to bring that way back down to $3.50 a pound. And so really just balancing that out. We can't have our farmers standing in the food bank or food pantry lines. They have to be fully supported. And we really tested that theory of if you give Black farmers the investment that they need and just step out of their way, trust and believe they're going to take care of not only themselves, but others. So like, for example, when we broke into a land grant doing institutional procurement, we brought in one Black farmer and then the program brought in 4 white farmers. So even when we're walking through the door of continuing to grow market share, we're not the only ones walking through the door. That oftentimes is not the case if the roles were reversed. So too many doors are being slammed in people's faces, and those no's are really making a major difference in their ability to have generational prosperity as small to mid-sized farms.
Thank you, Ashley. And I wanna transition to us to what's happening today. And this conversation today in the current landscape and where we are Cicely, want to turn it over to you about, where are you seeing the strongest examples of cooperative power amongst Black-led organizations, communities? And then are you able to share a few practices in which you've seen success in or challenges?
Yeah, I think it goes back some to what Ashley said too, is that there is an acknowledgement of a need for solidarity in us across geographies. And so they have land and space that we will never be able to recreate in urban areas. And urban areas have a certain amount of market share, commerce that can't be recreated in urban or peri-urban, shall we say, rural areas. And so what does that mean for each other to work together and to be able to have it? We aren't getting more land. And so where are some places that people can be from opportunities to do that, but also still survive and sustain themselves while in the process. And so I think you see a lot more people open to the collaboration of what that could mean, and then thinking about the full supply chain. So, definitely things coming from south to north, and what that means. Like, listen, y'all can sell watermelons for like wow prices up here. Um, and so, a lot of growers are thinking about cultivating that. Like, what does it mean to have like, some of our members now, in the Mid-Atlantic are working on like, like a watermelon, like cooperative intentionally to grow and to bring things to the north. And so what does that look like? And I think having more encouragement around people doing like real organic and like genuine relationships in which they have like shared values as well as like shared like vision, is something we're seeing more of. And I think some of that happened too, because people were able, at least as you said, for a certain point, like even though we still only receive like less than 1% of like all of like farm and funding and stuff from USDA, there was a little bit of a period where people got a little chance to breathe. And you need that to be able to dream and to have space to collaborate and to do other things. And so with that, then it opened people up to be able to do some genuine things with each other. So I think that's one way. I think another way you're seeing it is, everyone not having to do all the things, but coming together and bringing what your best talent treasure is to the table. And another thing I think is growth around cooperatives or alternative models for like land stewardship. Land ownership is not even ours. Indigenous folks and other people, it was about stewarding land. It was meant to be here in its nature. It's not for us to own, but it's for us to take care of. And so how can we get back to more of those models and community land trust or community stewardships and like alternative things, and then also having policies that support that. And then as well as like, you don't need a big box grocery store. I would say it's not appropriate for everyone, but how can we support other cooperative models that are owned and taken care of by the community that reflect the community in which we're in, and also have resources and policies that support that on different scales. And by scale, I don't mean that everything needs to be that it needs to get bigger. I would think scale, or maybe the better is like, can it be duplicated somewhere else? So I can do some of the same things that Ashley does, but not everything is meant to be big or have 4,000 people and like other stuff. Quite frankly, maybe the best size store is the 10 to 15,000 square foot store that comes every few blocks and it really means something to the community. So how can we get back to more of that model where stuff can be duplicated, but still thought about like locally and regionally as a connection?
Love that. Love that. And Dion, I want to pass it over to you. How do you think Black communities are adapting to rising land costs, climate change, and shifting markets, just based on your perspective? And how has your model responded, particularly as we're thinking about the work you're doing in Chicago and beyond?
Well, I mean, it's really tight right now. It is. It's every day we're waking up to something else that we have to balance, that we shouldn't have to even be responding to. And so it's a battle of our bandwidth. And it is directly tied to our will to live right now. I think we're just trying to stay alive at this point. And so I think what we've tried to do at with Dion Chicago Dream, and even those who work with us, our network, is number one, we try to be mindful of our influence, mindful of our buying power, of decisions we can make. Because a lot of times, what our team is seeing is, we'll go into a room and we'll talk about what we built and what we're doing, and they'll ask us a question like, "Oh, well, why don't you do this?" And we're like, "Yeah, we don't want to." They're like, "What you?" You know what I mean? They were like, what do you mean? And we was like, yeah, nah, I'm okay. You know what I mean? And I think that it's this there is undoubtedly a category of things that we have no say in. Not only in our food system, in living right now. There are just things we do not have a say in. But there's a whole lot of things that we do have a say in. And every now and again, we're reminded of this collective power that we can have. Oh, we're told all year how things are inevitable. And, this administration will be the end of everything. And who would have knew? Firing Jimmy Kimmel. You know what I mean? And listen, I'm a journalist by trade. You know what I mean? And I, free speech is something that is important to me. But what I do appreciate about the moment was that it just pissed off just enough people. It pissed off just enough people for people to say, yeah, I'm gonna keep my $12. That used to be $9. That used to be $5.99. And so with what we've been able to do with our organization and our network is number one, we try to make sure that we really limit the waste that we produced. So we try to be just as efficient as possible. And so even with the 250,000 pounds that we have, we don't waste anything. Anything that we don't utilize, we sell back for a credit. Also, we're extremely mindful of what. That's how dynamic I am. I just want y'all to know somebody. Listen, somebody back there is rocking with me. I'm gonna take it. But not only with the waste, but also making sure. Unfortunately, when you talk about that resilience, we gotta spend $1 and it gotta go 7 different ways. Like we just have to make sure, you know what I mean. And my vice president Danielle sitting right there. We argue a lot. Cause she was like, man, what are you doing? And I'll have like 90 different things because she's all of our operations and logistics. So anytime I agree to something, she's cursing me out. But I think that's the thing. I think that this era that we're in, it has required us to be different types of leaders. And I think that for the last few decades, the type of leader that was necessary wasn't as bold and wasn't as defiant, and it wasn't about physical safety, and it wasn't about risk. And so, I think that the market produces the leaders it needs. And I think that what we're seeing right now is as leadership, both individually and as organizations, as networks, as collectives, as co-ops, it looks different. And you will have to be way more risk averse right now. And so I tell people all the time, the only thing I do, I'm not nervous about what I say. I'm not nervous about the actions that I take. I just told myself, I said, hey, whatever we do as an org, and whatever decisions we make with my C-suite, I said, we have to make sure that we can stand behind it no matter where we are. And if we can do that, then we'll be fine. We're not going to get it right. But I think that what this moment requires, not just in food, because I mean, the food is but the example right now. But I mean, in everything, we have to be extremely well-intentioned, but also hold ourselves accountable to execution. I tell people a lot that um, entrepreneurs are judged off of execution too much, and social entrepreneurs are judged off intent too much. And I think that what we have to do is kind of get back to the middle of not only saying that, hey, we do good work or we have good intentions, but how are we judging that intention in our execution? Because we know that the dollars are even less now. We know that we have less jobs, we have less money, we have less jobs, we have less land. You know what I mean? All of these things. And yet we all still wake up, bright eyed, bushy tailed, smiles on our faces, defiant in our belief that things can and will get better because we've been through this before. So that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I love that. And, speaking of bolds, I've known Ashley for what, 10 plus years now, Ashley? Way back in Kentucky, where I'm from. Speaking of boldness, when we think about cooperative or value-added strategies such as processing, branding, aggregation, all of that, Ashley, how has that shown up in the work that you're leading in Kentucky? And, you know, with Ashley, we can talk about Kentucky all day and the powerful work that she's leading there, but now all across the nation, in so many partnerships. So talk to me a little bit about that, Ashley.
So in Kentucky, there's room for everyone to add their pieces to the larger puzzle at hand, when addressing these critical needs of small to mid-sized agriculture businesses and operations. So we do have a few cooperatives, and I do just want to be able to say their names. And so for the cooperatives and their efforts, referred to Tiffany Belfield Elamine, Kentucky Black Farmers Association, Dr. Nancy Dawson, Ag First Cooperative, other advocates like Casa Heron, Taylor Ryan, Mariel Gardner, Tanya Smith, and Sandra Ballou Barnes. And so for Black Soil, we operate alongside independent affiliate farms who are mainly small to mid-size, and they're focused on direct-to-consumer markets. So we're not in the subsidized commodity market.
Mhm.
So each of these farms have their own farmers market booths or their own roadside stands right there on their farm. And so we accelerate those legacy efforts. And so we then transform their operations into household names. We have one-of-a-kind marketing and branding campaigns like our Eat Local Year-Round Challenge. We have our product placement, our seed-to-shelf commitment. And so you spoke about these humongous grocery stores. I always think of the utilities and the cost of running it. So our two brick and mortar neighborhood pharmacy markets are probably like 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. So we are then able to work with our consumers' visual psychology of always having highly stocked shelves. Then we also have a mobile market. We call it Sprout. We go on missions with Sprout. So a mobile farmers market. So we basically become like a one-stop shop for these small to mid-sized farms. We're a reliable porch to jump off into deeper soil and, really competing in this cutthroat industry. And right now you're seeing a lot of our commodity farmers who 100% relied on one market. We talk about diversity is not only needed socially, but it's needed in agriculture. The monocropping, when that export market goes away, shame on every single one of those industry professionals and State Department of Ag who never work with those farmers to concentrate on their local community. Because when others turn your back on you and you've not turned your back towards your community, then you're going to need them and they're not going to be there. So we really allow the consumers that oftentimes hard to reach, underrepresented, see themselves in agriculture. We did that through farm tours, 2017 to 2020, and then with the pandemic, the last 5 years, we've been mainly doing aggregation and distribution, but on our own terms.
Yeah.
And that's the courage to walk away from the systems. And we already knew nobody was coming to check for us, so we had to just make it our own. And in spite of, that's really the work has been focused on the in spite of moments. And so we're just really glad to still be here.
Love that. And, speaking of, I gotta write all these terms down, these sayings that I'm hearing today, but speaking of making things your own, and to bring the boldness, Qiana, I wanted to turn it over to you about, what innovations or strategies give you hope today? How does urban agriculture connect to this kind of national movement that we're seeing from your perspective?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's, people oftentimes question if there's even urban agriculture. Or when I tell people, I run an urban agriculture office, or that there are other cities that have urban agriculture offices, and directors are like, what? How do you grow in concrete? And I think that what it means is that people don't really understand the creativity of space, and understanding that there are times when you have to do with what you have. And that a lot of times, in terms of thinking of Black sovereignty in particular, and thinking about cities and underutilized properties and neighborhoods, where for decades there were many neighborhoods, say in like New York City, and I'm sure y'all can make your own correlations in your own communities, where there were neighborhoods that were divested. Grocery stores left, businesses left, redlining happened, zoning was changing, And yet there were still people who chose to stay or had to stay. Does that mean that they don't deserve to eat or have a livelihood? So, to me, thinking about urban agriculture or connecting it to urban agriculture is that creativity around it. There should always be thought of as innovation and creativity around use of land, stewarding land, and creating economic and agrarian rooted power. But in thinking about innovation and strategies in particular around urban agriculture, just to make it a little more concrete, one of the things that I've been really excited to see and continue to explore is schools, school gardens, community gardens, urban farms, and other underutilized spaces. So, sorry, utilized spaces like school gardens and community gardens, and underutilized spaces like rooftops or vacant lots as critical infrastructure. So are we looking at them as connecting the dots to the supply chain and why they can, right, have different dots? So one, not just looking at schools as a place to dump food or to buy big food from larger suppliers, but creating creative procurement opportunities and power from micro to mid-sized farmers, and pushing school districts in order to right-size their contracts. But also, reality is many of our urban growers or even small to mid-scale farmers, in particular farmers of color, are all still growing at a small to mid scale. So there's also the opportunity of leveraging, say, small to micro contracts or meeting them where they're at their scale and still creating contracts that can create that food. And that speaks to the autonomy of the school district, because then they don't have to go to a larger bid process, and thinking about what you're meeting farmers or what they're able to scale and grow. And one of the things that we did with that kind of work or an intention was thinking about reimagining contracts, thinking about reimagining relationships. And so schools being infrastructure for procurement for farmers, and looking at what is culturally relevant that's grown, seasonal, what folks might have in surplus that can then be into schools, and not just looking at what's on the school plate, but thinking about other ways that food comes into schools. School bars, salad bars, harvest of the month, cultural events where, again, you're able to bring in that food. And also then the gardens as well. Oftentimes school gardens start as this cute photo op project or volunteer, and then it's like left or yeah, and everyone's like, people grow up, age out, parents give up, start new lives, the teachers start, and there's so much of that work that's then burdened on the teachers and volunteers. And then there's no reality of the sustainability of that. So what I've been excited about is looking at that in a different way. Is one, are there creating matching opportunities where folks, are there community gardeners that are leaders and practitioners? How do we get I see them as educators, get them contracts to go in the schools and create initiatives that do both. Whether that's utilizing city dollars, federal dollars, state dollars. Fun fact about my office is outside of my salary, which I'm paid inequitably lower than other executive directors, I have gotten $0 for any of the programming that we've done in the past 3 years. Yeah, it's very government. Very of the city of my time, or time of my city. And I say that because what we did with that work and built that innovations was identifying the opportunities for our urban ag partners and our Black, brown women and emerging farmers in our rural areas on how to reimagine the contract opportunities that we can have in the city. So that was building cost neutral opportunities, that was seeking private dollars, that was seeking state and federal dollars, like farm to school dollars, and using it in a way that wasn't just typical of what DOE in New York City thought we could and should be doing, but it was really representative of what I had seen in the work that we've done in food sovereignty based work and food justice work, and bringing the folks that were doing the work into the contracts, into the opportunities. Also looking at infrastructure like food forests and not just thinking of forests as just green canopy for tree's sake, but actually bringing in food production, arborist jobs, workforce, apprentice jobs. And if there are schools that have more property or underutilized land, are we creating those into food forests? Because it doesn't always have to look just like a community garden, and it doesn't always have to just look like raised beds. Like, we need a variety of, a natural ecosystem. And again, how do we create that and then find the pathways to get that work done? The last thing, because I know I've been talking a lot, is just the innovation around bringing things like agrivoltaics, the co-location of solar generation and agriculture. Oftentimes people know that in a rural setting, and there's also pressures around that because of businesses coming into the space and then using that land for just solar and not necessarily doing both. What we've been doing is looking at urban settings and creating that competition and actually work in our favor to create opportunities for urban agriculturalists to be leaders of that work and then work with solar, or create solar training opportunities where they're actually able to get NABCEP certified so they can get other green jobs, and do it at the scale, again, that's relevant to them, whether that's rooftop or in the city. So looking at models that still speak to the self-determination from an individual level, cultivating, fostering community support, but changing and influencing the institution, and then also looking at policy and trying to be the driver pushing that policy. So if there are dollars, how are you playing within the lines, but getting the money to do what your community needs, as opposed to everybody telling you what you should do with that money.
Love that. And one thing I will say is I want you all in the audience and even our friends online to start thinking about your questions, because I know you have a few. But we'll spin back around and start taking questions based on just this next question to you, Dion. When we think about just future movement, what can individuals, institutions, and allies in this room specifically, I cannot talk today, do today to move closer to the big, bold vision and really generating some solutions around this conversation?
Well, I think everybody should look at themselves as a Lego. I think depending on how old your children are, you either have a bowl or a bucket or a tote full of Legos, or you have a Lego that you stepped on in the middle of the night. And what I love about Legos is that, when they're by themselves, they don't surprise you. You're like, oh, there's a Lego. And then also when you see somebody build with Legos, you're like, oh, okay, they're Legos. And I think that if we actually thought about ourselves not only as extensions of ourselves, but also how can we serve or connect when it's time, I think we would prepare more. A lot of people, say, oh, Dion, you guys are bold or ambitious when we just think anything is possible. And so, I would challenge everybody to actually think about that future that you're hoping for, because chances are you didn't plan for it. If it happened tomorrow, I don't need ideal circumstances to survive or succeed. But if I did have those ideal circumstances, what would they be? How would my work? Because when I was with, I'm um, a Rockefeller fellow, and here I am on the other side of the world in this random space with other leaders, and we did a futuring exercise, and for all of specifically my Black people, they asked, where do you see your work? Here, as in the stretch or the sky. And what I had realized was that I was building a world that I didn't think I would live to see, because I very rarely see Black men live beyond the age of 35 or 40. And that was the first time that I actually realized that I never, even in what I do today, I never plan on being successful. I just trash it. And I enjoy what I do and I love it, but I never challenged myself to think about what if we all four of us pulled it off? I didn't think about that. I got so preoccupied with the fight of it. I got so preoccupied with saying you can't tell us what to do, and we're gonna feed people fresh produce no matter what, and we won't take volunteers. But then I never thought about, well, what if everybody adopted that? Then what? And so what I would say is I would hope that everyone not just have that doomsday plan, even though we are getting real close, but to also dare yourself to actually think about the other side of that, because that matters too. Things can work out, things do work out. And, sometimes resilience is necessary, and other times you don't need it. Because sometimes it just shake out. You wake up and you just feel like you got the star off Mario Kart, and you could just drive through the grass and it don't even matter. You're gonna win. So I just will hope that people would do that.
Love that. And I'm part of the board too, so Cicely, when, we think about policy interventions as we're thinking about future movements, what policy interventions are most urgent right now based on just where we are today and where you see the future going?
Yes. So I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. And in full transparency, I did work for a local government at one point. I was a deputy resilience officer for the city of Atlanta's mayor's office. So I've been in Qiana's position where they could pay my salary. And I think I had a $12,000 budget for a staff of 18. 12,000, a whole 12,000. And so I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. One, I think just from a worker standpoint, updating our laws to include food and farm workers and labor protections. Currently, they aren't included. They don't have to receive minimum wage. They don't have the same labor protections as some of the rest of us. So I think there should be a shift in that. And you're seeing the cracks in that system now as our immigration and other stuff shifts, and people are wondering why. And it started long before we had whatever insanity is going on now. When you started getting food recalls and just other things, that's all a domino effect about how we treat everyone at every point of the food system. So I think there needs to be some updates there. I think we need updates to our land use policy and how we value land. In the same way that cities plan for housing and public transportation and sidewalks, we also need to plan for food and use of land. You can't back into it. And every time I went to a neighborhood and people want gardens and farms and other stuff, if it's already overbuilt, and even if you want rooftop gardens, you need to know that before you build a building because the weight of what that looks like. And so we need to plan for full cities. In industrial age, when people came to cities, nobody planned for the food. It wasn't like at some point there used to be farms in cities and they got lost, but in the same way we allow for parks and stuff, we need to plan for food. But they had all these people come and they were used to people being able to grow their own food because people lived in rural areas, and then they all came to cities in industrial age. And then it was like, how are people going to eat? And this was pre-refrigeration. So they had issues with people getting food that wasn't sort of created, just no one had thought about it. So I think there need to be updates there as well, in both rural and city areas. Like, how do we plan for how people will eat, not just where they will live? I think we need updates to our land laws around heirs property, and, community or land trusts and things like that. And maybe not have them be so difficult so that it changes with every county and every state and every city you go to, but things that make it easier for people to have different visions of how things can be cooperated and owned. And I think some land use that also then allows for how we relate with big versus small businesses. Everyone's always like, oh, we're in favor of big business. And then you give money to all things that undercut small businesses with the types of stores and commerce that we allow. And if you want some things to be in there, then we have to be more intentional about it and make space for it. And I think last but not least, just major updates and changes to our farm bill, and ones that really center like people. It shouldn't even be called the farm bill. It should be called the food, land, how you eat bill, because calling it farm bill, I think limits people seeing themselves in it, but it affects every aspect of all of us in here, whether you never touch soil or not. Some part of that farm bill touches you, and people then don't think about the changes that happen for it. They don't think about the cuts to school programs and senior programs and just how your food is regulated and all those things. And so I think a really people-centered and expansive farm bill that is accessible for all of us to be able to participate in and understand would be best, and sort of lead to participatory budgeting and things like that or updates we need to see to policy.
Love that. Love that. And Tambra, I was looking at you regarding the Farm Bill piece, so love that. And I want to toss it over to you, Ashley, and again, be thinking of some questions because I'm going to start taking questions here very soon. When we think about funding and partnerships, what have been some that have been proven to be most sustainable as far as investment wise, and what's still that kind of missing piece, Ashley, as we're thinking about future movement?
Okay, so private philanthropy with strategic partnerships, they provide balance to the infrastructure. So first you get that foundation, you lower your risk, you work to mitigate the risk to increase the rewards. And secondly, mastering direct to consumer narrative marketing has produced our greatest success and impact to investments. And, we're really struggling and working against funding deserts like Kentucky. So outside of Appalachia, people love funding Eastern Kentucky. That's no shade at all. No shade at all. But the entire state desperately needs the equity of those funds spread out. I will say a proven partnership, so I'm gonna call it, I'll be so mad at me, but Dr. Lillian Brislin is here, formerly of an institution in the state of Kentucky. And when we were unable to break into the workplace CSA voucher program, she took it upon herself with her autonomy as a leader there at the institution, and we created our own like side by side, literally like separate but equal program. And before they would let us into the main program, and once we were able to break through and become a part of the main program, we still have farmers selling into the institution. They're selling into dining services and things like that. But you have to have that person to give you the right yes. And a lot of times we don't know how to approach the right decision maker. I kept running into the same two resistors. And so my hypothesis was, if I go around the two resistors, will I get a different response and outcome? And sure enough, I found success in reaching out and expanding. So one, being able to have the bravery and courage to walk away from systems that are harmful. People have experienced freezes, to cuts, terminations, and they were thinking that would probably never ever happen. So now you see a lot of events that people go to annually. They might not be able to attend this year because they were supported through federal funding that at any whim. So, controversially, we're not accepting SNAP EBT. In 2019, when I applied for SNAP EBT, got it like in a week. Tried to revamp, the stores are back open. It's a hassle. And then you're going to turn around and cut people who need it. And then people who say have, certain criminal backgrounds that can't even participate in the federal funding programs. So we have, again, the Eat Local Year Round Challenge is our grassroots, like it's in our control. And I think if that spreads even more and people have the courage and the bravery to say, I use these USDA programs or other federal programs to wean myself to balance out, build up that infrastructure. But it's oftentimes hard when you really are trying to, pay Peter to pay Paul. I think I said that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think you got it. I think you got it. You got it. And to wrap us off, before I open it up to questions, Qiana, I wanted to kind of hear your roadmap, especially as we think about supporting Black food sovereignty in communities over the next 5, 10, 20 years. What do you think that's going to look like nationally, and what lessons can we learn as we scale?
Okay, lessons. A lot in the question.
I realized I gave you the very complex.
I know. I might need you to remind me. Well, one thing I did want to make sure I didn't forget, and I wanted to start with, is oftentimes when I talk about the spectrum and using food as, a tool and a driver in the spectrum between food security, food justice towards food sovereignty, I oftentimes kind of base those conversations in social constructs, because oftentimes we talk about and we're living through social constructs, classism, racism, misogyny, but we oftentimes are so impacted that we forget that they're not organic. These are social constructs built, and constructs in terms of hope and in terms of thinking of future is we have to think about breaking, like, and dismantling, if breaking sounds harsh. Dismantling. Remember, I'm not talking for the city, right? I'm talking to myself. Um, so yeah, so it's even just saying that and starting there. In order to have the future we want to have, even if it's not the future we're going to be able to live in. I am 49. I'm gonna be 50 in December. What we're what I'm working towards, and what I often think is kind of what you were saying, Dion, it may not be for me to live. It may not be for me to treasure, but doesn't mean that I shouldn't be building on it and towards it anyway. Just like our ancestors did before. But that means also, I think we are at a point, at a time that we realize that the status quo has not worked and isn't working. And as harsh and as hard as it is, it's all based and rooted in social constructs, and social constructs can be dismantled and broken. Now, when you break them, then where are we going and what do we have? And I think this is where it comes back to the self-determination and building autonomy and building the systems that we want. So in a practical way, I would say one of those call to actions or immediate steps I would love to see is continuing to build with folks and shifting from the paradigm of food security and trying to make food security systems work and address hunger when they're not built to end hunger, and really moving towards what do we really, going across that spectrum, how do we really foster the justice and the sovereignty that we want, and taking this time and the lessons learned and building what we have and what we've seen on how to move that forward. So if that means looking at policy, what is a policy that would be truly instrumental in changing? And how do we support the systems that make that happen? And who is willing and wants to be inside the system to also move and change that from the inside out, while we're also working on the outside? Thinking about our food and our food systems, and I think you said this earlier, Cicely, is going not just beyond just what we do in our urban settings or in our neighborhood setting. How do we connect and build power across our rural partners? If we're creating spaces of opportunity of selling food, I mean, watermelons is a good example. I was just talking to a commissioner. We were just talking about how desperate we are to get watermelons in New York City. Seeded watermelons, and how we'll go to trucks that are coming from South Carolina just to get that watermelon. So just thinking yeah. Somebody was saying somebody said they went to a grocery store and there was like a $20 melon in the store. I would much rather buy my watermelon from somebody who came up from South Carolina and took the journey and was willing to grow it and bring it to me at a better price. All that to say, how do we reimagine the systems that we want to build in? How do we inform the policies that we want? And even before the policies, how do we build those relationships? And if there are existing policies that we could be shifting and moving, how do we then inform how to use that as a lever? So not just looking at the feds, let's look at state, let's look at city, let's look at other dollars, but also, is that a way to start or support a farmer at their scale, a supplier at their scale, so then they can entertain or build new models with us together? So these are some of the early steps that I think that we have to do now, even in a cloud of fear, and a cloud of fascism, and a cloud of folks trying to take our power, is how to identify the voice, how to identify the work, how to believe in it, and then how to build it now with what we do have, so we can continue to build on what we want to see. And again, the reality is the work that you're doing, you may not be able to live to see the fruits of it. Your children may not even be able to see the fruits of it, but it shouldn't mean that that's not what's needed to be done.
I love that. And with that, So many powerful insights and, just super appreciative of what you all shared. I did want to open it up for questions. So wanting to take a few questions from the audience, and I'll also check in online with our online friends to see any questions. So yes, let me grab a mic really quickly. Is this one? Okay. And if you can just introduce yourself, and yeah, question.
Hello, wonderful panel. My name is Jaslyn Amun. I'm the executive director of Inyame Kua Farm Collective here in Washington, D.C. Myself and my husband were both farmers here in the area, urban farmers that people really don't completely understand. My question is to you, Qiana. Our organization has been pushing for policy in DC to increase the amount of food grown locally by Black and brown farmers on the actual grocery shelves of major retailers. And we've been utilizing New York City's food forward policy and New York's Executive Order 32 to really help guide and shape the language and drive for this bill that we're pushing. One question that the council continues to come to us with is the concern they're really about is how is New York able to get the purchasing from local foods without the increase in costs? Because they are just very set that importing is cheaper. So would like to hear directly from you, how has New York, because what we've seen from the reports is it has been comparable costs still. How have you been able to keep prices similar to what was happening when you were getting more imported goods before?
Oh, what a good, you don't have any idea on how good that question is and how much I'm gonna probably talk to you offline about. But the reality, one thing I will say is, so there's our food policy office in the city, and they write the food forward report, and I've been doing some of their evaluations on it. My work in the Office of Urban Ag has actually currently been working parallel since we started. But taking a step back around the food policy and what's the math not mathing, what I will say is I think we're at a point of time where we have to, again, reimagine and divest from this paradigm of imported food, large scale supply, and leveraging just volume as the only cost and the only value to address. I think as we deal with tariffs and we continue to see the impact of tariffs on food and food ag, we should have always had different values and valued aligned policy in our purchasing beyond costs. That's something the Office of Urban Ag is actually trying to continue to explore, is values aligned policy, taking a step back when you don't use volume and cost as the one equation. How do you create better power, which we think will be more supportive of urban ag and regional policy? But just to kind of come back around there is, the reality is the affordability of food and that paradigm of local food is always going to cost more. What it always ignored was the reality of other values in why you're growing that food. It never accounted for the farm labor. It never accounted for the amount. It didn't account for the supply chain. It didn't even account for likely the packaging and processing. But now if we're even going to factor in tariffs, it is more than time to divest from that paradigm. We need to actually think about what is valuable to our land, what is valuable to people, what is valuable to the community, and therefore what's valuable to our supply chain, and how close is our supply chain. And again, not just looking at volume to save us, because it's not, but also thinking about the affordability and what can we do to increase more affordable and access to food, and why then should we be looking at urban and micro, hyper local food production and food systems in a better way? Why should we have resources that goes towards that? So it's like we've been playing around with this affordability of food in this kind of vacuum where all of those status quo things are falling apart in our face. And that's racialized capitalism and late stage capital falling apart in our face. That's a bigger answer. But to your point, I think this is the window of time. If the math's not mathing, it's because it never did. And even looking at reports where people want to put the good foot forward, good food forward, you have to actually have the principles and the food to really support the supply chain that you really want. That's something that report unfortunately misses. This is something that I'm hoping in your city you're able to do. And I think with urban agriculture and supporting the systems that you want to see, there might be actual way around it. But the answer is looking at closer systems and more more looking at more policies and procurement that go beyond just cost. And this is the window of time. But yeah, a lot of those paradigms are going to fall apart right now.
Absolutely.
Okay, also, I'm sorry, I'm not, I live in, you know, a smaller community, but if you can compel your elected officials around the partnerships you have, perhaps explore working with leading healthcare or medical institutions for food as medicine, drive home that you're going to overcome compounding challenges around health disparities. If you have entities that work within gun violence prevention or reduction, that's one of our kind of specialties there in Kentucky. You know, we've worked to drive down our prevalence of gun violence and the harm in reducing that. And then lastly, you know, harm reduction. So this is a major harm reduction approach where not only is it food as medicine, gun violence prevention, but you're also looking for that substance use recovery and bringing people hope and bringing them jobs. So speak to this elected official's lower self. They want to see crime down. They want to see increase of economic development. But you know, in your heart of hearts and what your shared values are is, you know, bringing the quality of life of your community up and seeing people like really glow or radiate from the produce. So that's, you know, I want to encourage you in not giving up in that.
No, that's great.
Wait, and I go to add one more thing to that.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
please.
So I also think that this is where you could revisit with people about the importance of eating seasonally.
Yes.
And so if you start with a crop that, there's some crops that actually aren't that price sensitive between local and not, and starting with that and about infusing small things into seasonality. So when I ask you to come in the next day and buy all the things, let's start out with a couple and see what that looks like. I think that also helps dip people's toe into it and to shift and to see how many that $1 recirculates within the community. And how you could infuse this in. Like, I think everybody thinks you have to adopt everything wholesale. You don't actually. You could put small things on the plate and make really big differences. But focusing on that and saying we'll always have a seasonal local thing with it. And then actually, if you get the consumers to demand it. So I found a lot of universities and stuff, when they have anchor institutions who have procurement things, it's largely been demanded by the students and other people who pay money there. So if they start demanding, then people answer. So I used to strategically have people call into the office, tell them that's what you want, but it won't come from me. But then it came from you, and it's a different reaction to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
Can I quickly add something? Because this is all so right, and I'm so glad that y'all added. It's that multiplier effect. Like, they want to hear that you're actually supporting businesses, and they want to hear that if they do this, it's going to multiply in that economic development in your city, in your district. So it's not just addressing one thing, it's actually addressing multiple things. And not just in the heart, but in the dollars as well. And scale, the more you're able to show like their contracts and supply that you're able to do consistently, like Cicely was saying as well, the more you're able to demonstrate that you're able to meet those contracts. And there are other people who can as well.
Absolutely. Question. Renee, I'm coming your way. My flip-flop broke earlier today, so I'm kind of wobbling.
We're not trying to cause any extra harm here, right? Actually, I wanted to, I'm Renee Katakalos. I work for Fresh Farm here in DC and also have a long history in the regional food system here. So Ashley, you made a comment earlier about grant review panels looking at proposals, and lots of times like a smaller, you know, coming from a smaller place, getting overlooked and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to make a comment and get your reaction that like I've sat on some of those USDA review panels for some of these, some of the AMS programs, and also some panels locally of some foundations that do some community reviewing into their things. And I think it's just really important for folks doing this work to actually get on those panels, and that people don't always know about it. I've definitely been in conversations with people who are judging something that they don't know anything about and can't understand what the value is that is being offered. So I just wanted to raise up that, like, all of us, and obviously it takes some time and they give these little stipends and that kind of thing. But if people are not applying to those programs, if you can find the way to get on those review panels, diversify the panels and bring different perspectives so that the decision making can get change, and you can educate other people who are on those panels who haven't seen some of this stuff, because they haven't seen a lot.
Yeah.
All righty, we'll take one more question. Well, maybe two.
No, let's do two. We're gonna go fast.
Two, okay, we can go fast. All right, I'm coming back to you. And if you can just introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ann Carroll. I'm a part-time professor in the Sustainable Urban Planning Program. So I heard you about the planning and land use. I'm also retired from the EPA, and I actually started our urban agriculture work in 2008. So yay, I got out before now. And bummer for everybody else who's suffering through this. Given the general crankiness that we have right now, I'm kind of thinking about Dion's riff to start about like the moment that got everybody pissy enough to like cancel subscriptions, and the incredible Black leadership and churches that have brought Target to their knees. So blue skying for the now and the future, what would you have us as consumers do that can be, one, get attention, and two, start firing up the Black food sovereignty, and I would say food and fiber sovereignty that you might want to have for the future? Thank you. And you guys are great. I'm just sparking all over the place.
We need a mic. I've been laughing all the way. I think what I try to do is, I'm really intentional about where we are. I think that when you look at how you interact with the public and various generational divides, I think for the number one, we know people are online. We know they need in-person touch point. And then also we have our delivery. So we have 3 different ways that we're consistently doing it. The first thing I would say is just get consistently loud about something. The problem is that we don't understand how important it is to keep going. The thing about the Jimmy Kimmel thing is it did not go away. And the beautiful thing about things that catalyze groups and people is we don't pick it. We don't pick the thing that motivates everybody to give a damn. But what I've done, like I'll tell you, most of my friends and colleagues here who have seen me for the first time since last week, I boldly put on LinkedIn that I'm going to apply for the Feeding America president position, right? Now here's the thing. I did it because number one, I had to get it out, and I had to be consistent with who I am internally, externally. So when you talk about that blue skying in that moment, the problem is everybody's quiet, so no one knows where anybody stands. So we don't know what that thing is because everybody thinks that being quiet, we saw in real time over the course of a week and a half, against the president, the FCC chair, everything. We will find different ways to make you feel it. And so I think with all of us, you're seeing, that 4 or 5 times multiplier because it has to be there. Not just, I told people, I don't say, hey, we want to feed Black people. I love Black people. I want to feed all of them. But I also love the fact that a Black organization created a universal solution. My language right now cannot be siloed. because unfortunately, we need everybody that we can get in everything. And so when you talk about catalyzing people, maybe it's not from food, maybe it's from something else, but then it can move to food. And so I think like when we focus in on harnessing energy, you know what I mean? It's like a room full of toddlers. You don't know what the hell to expect. You could get a room full of nappers or all hell can break loose. But you know what? It's okay because you're keeping all of that energy contained to one room in the house. They didn't mess up everything. And so what I would say to you is like, I'm infatuated with movement building and getting people to believe in how strong they are. And the first step in that is just getting them used to moving, getting them used to talking and believing. Because you'd be surprised. I mean, even if we're not getting biblical where they talk about 2 or 3, but just if you can like social media has desensitized us into thinking that 200 people seeing a video is not a lot of people. You know what I mean? So like that's what I would say is understanding that every single view, every single comment, every single conversation matters. Because what I tell everybody is I got to the Ellen show off of a social media post that had 6 likes and 4 comments. I didn't get 1 million views. And what that taught me was to always honor every interaction. And if we can do that, if you want to catalyze people, you go back to all those people you worked with that got out too. And if there's 20 of you all that got out before shit got bad, then each of you go get 20 people that got shitted on. Now you have 40. You know what I mean? It's a game of numbers. And then from there, we just keep going. That's it. Just stay, because losers are gonna stop. Nobody in this room is more motivated than me. I'm sorry. I have a fucking breathing contest right now. Like, that's how excited I am to do this. So I just would ask you or ask everybody here, what gets you up? What gets you going? And work towards that. Because if you really care, the funny thing is if you just really focus on being happy, you end up being a pretty good person. Ain't nobody come to you and say you were a bad person for focusing on happiness. So I'll stop my rant there.
And what we'll do is I definitely want to leave some room for you all to network with our panelists and stuff before we head out this evening. But I just want to take this time to thank everyone.